Good evening. Welcome to Politicit Podcast. We've got Dave Owen with us. Owen Communications. I mean, Dave, you're, people don't realize that you're kind of a guy behind the scenes, John, that does a lot, right?
You know, you're not supposed to talk about that. The first rule of Fight Club,
Right.
You don't talk about Fight Club. But yeah, you're the guy who gets me to come out of the shadows a little bit.
Yeah. So and this is one of the things I want to talk to you about. I was at the state convention, and by far the best speech at the convention was Carson Jorgensen. But I happened to have some inside information to know that you were working with Carson.
Well, I was working with Carson, and yeah, I was his speechwriter. I mean, you can say that. I think people don't understand exactly what that means all the time, especially on there's speeches that you give, and it's not a big deal. Frankly, I did a lot of convention speeches this year.
Right.
But when you're doing one, for example, in 2012, I wrote Mia Love's nomination speech that won her the nomination. And when you do one like that, that's almost kind of I don't know what you would call it.
Watershed moment, or whatever. Yeah,
one that you really want to turn it's got to be a collaboration. Without Carson, that speech doesn't exist.
Right.
But
yeah, because you very much pick up the voice of people.
Yeah,
that you work with.
It's kind of scary, but yeah. I do.
Well, it scares them. I know that. I have personal experience with that.
But it was due to hours and hours of conversation, and I think the sleeper part of that speech, and I think I've beaten you half to death with it since then, was the question that he asked early on, where he said, "Can anybody please tell me a single place in this country where life is better because Democrats are in charge?" And I thought the Republican National Convention was very good in a lot of ways, but it drove me crazy because that should have been the operative question behind every speech and every event in that convention. Tell me one place in the country where life is better because Democrats are in charge. So far, I haven't found anybody who can tell me one. And that needs to travel more and really ought to be the theme of what we're doing. It is stunning to me. And I think we've seen a real turn in this country. To me, the Democratic Party has gone full Soviet. Number one, it really is a Marxist party at its left wing. I mean, it's leaving behind a lot of people I know.
Well, I like to say that that these progressives in the Democratic Party have gone so far left. They've left our families. They've left our children, and they've left sanity.
They've left their party. I mean, it used to be that you could, we argued about things, or we debated them, or we had disagreements, but you had some common ground. You remember when people used to say, well, yeah, they see it differently, but we all love this country. Have you seen TV this summer? Have you watched some of the pro-Palestinian demonstrations? It is death to Israel. It is death to America. And hatred for Israel is a proxy for hatred against the United States. And that's where a big chunk of that party has gone. But what scares me even more is... I
think if you just look at the choice in the vice presidential candidate, I was worried they'd pick Shapiro.
Yeah.
Because I felt like he was one of the few that would really help them to win the election, right? And...
They couldn't. And it was because, this is what I love, because he's Jewish, because he's a Jew. That's the reason they couldn't pick him. I mean, what does that tell you about today's Democrat Party? And so they get a person, I love the saviors of democracy, who now have a presidential nominee that hasn't received a single vote in a primary. And they've selected, not elected, and now she's going to run. And the fact that there are people, but here's the thing, the Democrat Party has now become, who is it that says that? Tucker Carlson says, we're not running against people, we're running against a machine. And it reminds me, I'm old enough to remember the Soviet Union. And it was, you vote for the party. The party will guide you. We'll let you know who the premier is going to be. We'll let you know after that happened. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I mean, that was the thing. You vote for the party. It doesn't matter. It's the same way the Chinese Communist Party is today. you know, and it's the way the Soviet Union was. And I thought,
yeah, and they you know, the Chinese put in some economic reforms that kind of use some principles of capitalism, but now they found that they were losing. It was about power, and they were losing their power, so they cramped down on it.
And it's always been in the framing of an authoritarian state, which is where an awful lot of Democrats want to take us. You know, I don't want to get too far afield here, but last year I did a bunch of reading. I feel like I'm possessed of some esoteric knowledge. You know, we're like the only people watching this that might remember, and it was before our time, but Whittaker Chambers and Alger Hiss. And I went back and read Whittaker Chambers' writing, and it was stunning. And it was he was a young man that was at Columbia University, extremely intelligent, and he gravitated, and this is back in the 30s, towards communism, because he looked out at the world and believed that was the only way you were going to be able to. Again, it's authoritarianism. Somebody's got to be in charge. These plebes can't be the ones who govern themselves. Well, we're seeing a repeat of that. And it was true back then, and it's true today. And the thing that, when you read, I feel like I'm afflicted by history, because when you read this stuff, you realize there is no new thing under the sun. And I like what somebody said, that Marxism is just the operating system. What it's really about is authoritarianism. And that's the turn that the Democratic Party has taken. But look at Joe Biden for the last 3.5 years. Do you think he's been president?
Well, and what was funny after that debate is the press was acting like, oh my gosh, no idea. It was like they had this Jedi mind trick out there that had convinced us that he was okay.
There's gambling here in Casablanca. Yeah. I mean, absolutely everybody knew that the guy was, what's the term? Non-compos mentis, or what, I can't remember what it is, but in other words, he wasn't in his right mind. He isn't possessed of his faculties, and he hasn't been the president. And that reminds me of the old Soviet Union. Every premier seemed to have a cold. He wouldn't show up to the Politburo meetings. You wouldn't see him for months at a time. Well, he has a cold, and drop off, you know, different people that you could name over the years. And when they elected, and I will say this, John Fetterman has actually turned out to be kind of a pleasant surprise, mostly because he afflicts the comfortable over on that side of things. You know, he says, yes, I'm a liberal. I am not a progressive. But when he ran, let's face it, he was in bad shape. And Democrats in Pennsylvania went out and did their duty and voted Democrat. It wasn't about him. They could have put a box of Cheerios up there. If it was the Democratic nominee, they would have voted for the box of Cheerios. And I feel like that's where we're at now with this presidential election. Kamala Harris she couldn't get a single presidential vote when she ran on her own, and she still hasn't gotten one yet. And yet they're building her up as if she's the I don't know what.
And they're just keeping her. They're keeping her in the basement.
Keeping her in the basement. Same thing they did with Joe. I don't think they can do it this time. I think we are seeing massive tectonic shifts in the country right now. And I hope it comes through in November. But I think you're going to see an unprecedented number of Latinos voting for Trump and an unprecedented number of black men, but I don't think exclusively black men, shifting over to vote for Trump, because they know now it's what do they call it, an A-B comparison? You know, you had 4 years of Trump, 3 of which were really good till we got hit with a bioweapon, and then you've had now 3.5 years of Biden. And you'd have to be a complete idiot to think life is better because Democrats have been in charge.
Yeah. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
John Johnson is a real American who does real American things in his campaign videos. Here's John Johnson standing in a field wearing a cowboy hat. Here's John Johnson playing basketball and making the shot, because John's a winner. Here's John Johnson's family getting ready for a photo. See, John has a family, just like you. Here's John Johnson showing you he's serious and means business, but also laughing because John's relatable. Here's John Johnson going for a run because...
Oh, wait just a minute. That's enough of this. I'm not a flashy politician who can pull off a campaign video pretending to be something I'm not. I'm a bit of a nerd who prefers data-driven decisions and conservative principles. I have a PhD in economics. I'm a data analytics professor at USU, an entrepreneur, a business owner, an innovative job creator, and a family man. I helped fund and lead the referendum to repeal the recent tax increases on our food and fuel. I didn't inherit success, I worked for it. I co-founded a company that created software that streamlined the mortgage process to make things easier, quicker, and more productive. Following the housing bubble in 2008, when other companies looked for ways to survive, we found ways to thrive and created hundreds of high-paying jobs across the country. Utah is growing, and technology and the way we do business is changing, but our principles have not, and they never will. Utah needs innovative leaders who understand economics and the impact of taxes on businesses and families to solve the issues facing our state without adding additional burdens and uncertainty. Again, my name's John Johnson, and I would love to earn your vote. Welcome back to Politicit. We've got Dave Owen here today. And Dave, you know, just before the break, we were talking about how the Democratic Party is going. But one of the things that hit me when I was at the convention is that this is a different Republican Party. And I hate to call them the country club Republicans, but that's kind of a term of art, right? It seems as if that party is dead.
I have dear friends who are members of the establishment, you know, institutional Republican Party as we've known it for the last 40 years. And I tell them as kindly as I can that that party is over. It no longer exists. It has gone the way of the Whigs. And if the Republican Party were to return to that, for example, Nikki Haley will never be president of the United States of America. Now, next time around, they could nominate her. She will not win because there are tectonic shifts that are taking place right now. There's a woman named Batya Ungar-Sargon, and I would encourage anybody viewing this podcast to go look her up. A Brooklyn Jewish liberal, I mean, from old school, from way back. And she has actually come over to the Trump movement because she says that the Democratic Party has become the party of the credentialed elites and the completely dependent poor. And that is who they serve, and they have completely abandoned the working class. Now, in my opinion, and I mean, you know how I got into politics. I mean, I have always had that sensibility of the working class. And I've never bought that the Democrats were the honest representatives of the working class. And I waited, unlike a lot of people, I waited 40 years for Donald Trump to come along. I didn't know it was him. But I gave a speech coming out of the 2012 election when Romney lost and said if the Republican Party continues to be the party of Wall Street and the elites, it will go the way of
the Whigs.
The Whigs. It will no longer exist. And I had no idea it was going to be Donald Trump, because I said if they don't get back to their populist nationalist economic base, they will have no purpose. And I'll be darned, this very imperfect vessel named Donald J. Trump comes along. And I got to tell you, what he was saying is what I've thought for 40 years. And I think there was a lot of that going around in 2016.
Now, you know, we use these terms like populist, for instance.
Yeah.
A term people like throw around now is MAGA, right?
Right.
But what does that really mean?
It's really radical. Let me tell you how radical it is. It's so radical that it believes that the primary function and concern of the American government should be the well-being and prosperity of the American people.
That's radical.
Oh, my gosh. Say it ain't so. That's exactly what it is. That it doesn't mean that we ignore the rest of the world. It doesn't mean that we're not involved in the rest of the world. What it means is the American government has as its first priority the well-being and the prosperity of the American people. And the Republican Party is going to have to continue to go that way, or it will no longer exist. But the neocons who want to be the world's policemen and who want to build the government to be ever bigger and stronger, because what they really want to do is argue about who collects the coins that drop off the table, right? That's really what that argument's about. But there are tectonic shifts going on right now, and it's not right-left. It's up-down. Those are the real shifts that are going on right now. And I'm not a Marxist, never have been. I don't believe there's no way that leads to anything but desolation, despair, and starvation. So that's not going to happen. I do believe in markets, and I do believe in capitalism. But then I get into the problem of, they get into free trade and they say, well, let's, what about the free market? My response to that is, great, let's try it sometime, because we sure haven't. There's an awful lot of crony capitalism out there.
Yeah, and one of the things I don't think people understand, when Marx talked about the war between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, he was not talking about the rich versus the poor. The bourgeoisie was the working class, was the entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, it definitely was. And you go back, and I made references to Whittaker Chambers stuff, and I know this is arcane and esoteric, but what amazes me, he wrote a book called Witness. It was 800 pages. Do you know that it was the Life magazine #1 selling book in America? 800 pages, and it's kind of his philosophical autobiography, talking about how he became a communist, how he awoke. What's interesting is he did not abandon communism because of politics or economics. For him, it was a spiritual journey. It was a spiritual conversion that caused him to reject communism. I know this is really out in the weeds,
but it's interesting. Why don't you talk just a little bit more about that and explain to people what that conversion was?
Well, one of the things was, and again, you got to go back in the Wayback Machine, and you had Stalin doing the purges, and the New York Times, all the same players were defending Stalin, the same ones that defend all this stuff now, the same people that authored the Russia hoax. Russia hoax. Well, at the time, they were defending Stalin and saying, oh, these things are exaggerated. It's not really real. And what hit Chambers at last was that Stalin was, and there were apologists who said, well, even if he's doing it, he's out of step with Marxist theory. And what hit Chambers finally is, no, he's not. If you understand Marxist-Leninist doctrine, he was doing exactly what he should do, because the only thing that mattered was the revolution. And the fact that he was killing, 50, 60 million Russians with starvation, or executing, or having these Stalinist courts that the Democrats are now so fond of here in this country, and I'm not kidding, and I won't ever walk that back, that same kind of a show trial. The kind of stuff that the lawfare that they put Donald Trump, the January 6th people, and I'm not talking about anybody that was violent or did something wrong. I'm talking about Mima in the Capitol taking selfies with the guards, and they did all that kind of stuff, and it's very Stalinist. And it finally dawned on Chambers that Stalin was not departing from Marxist-Leninist doctrine; he was fulfilling it. And that was the thing that brought him back. And you go and read about the trial and the accusations against Alger Hiss, and what you realize is the same sides existed back then. There was a little more conservative, open, free press, but for the most part, the press was definitely on that other side. And that really, the same dynamic we see today existed back in the early 50s. And so that's what I'm saying. When I read history, what I realize is there is no new thing under the sun. And for some reason, we keep repeating these things. And I believe that we're at a very dangerous cycle right now with the United States.
So how do we get out of that?
Hopefully we win this next election. And I think election integrity does matter. Right now we've got some battles going on here within the state. And what the powers that be don't realize is, and I've said this from the beginning about election integrity. Number one, there's a crisis of confidence in our elections nationwide. I've seen polls recently between 62 and 66% of Americans believe fraud will be significant in the 2024 election. That's a problem. Number two, that the perception or the loss of confidence in our electoral system can be as damaging as actual fraud, because it suppresses turnout and it causes people to lose faith in the system because they no longer believe. And third, and this is what our people here in Utah are, I'm frankly, Deidre, sorry, I'm going to have to mention your name, but she's not alone. What they don't realize is the cure to all that is 100% transparency. everything done in the light of day. What happens in the voting booth, so to speak, we don't really have them anymore, but the interaction with the ballot, that's private. Everything else is public. And all that data and the counts and the voting lists and all that kind of stuff that these elected officials are now treating like it's proprietary and they somehow own the rights. No, we paid for that. We paid for every envelope. We paid for every counting machine. We paid for it. It is ours. You've got to open it up to us. And sunlight always has been and always will be the best disinfectant. And so our electoral processes have to be, and you know, Scott Adams was the one back in 2020, and he's I guess an election denier, because what he said is the minute he found out that they were excluding Republican observers from counting locations around the country, he knew the election could not be trusted. And it's a pretty good point, because it has to be 100%. Now, you make me king of Utah tomorrow, we go back to paper ballots and we vote on one day, and they're counted that night. But that's just me. Right. I hope we can move toward that, Senator.
Yeah. Well,
see, I'm going to get you in trouble. I'm going to get me in trouble.
You know, like, Dave, though, I think you're making a really good point, and it's a point that we have to be concerned about, and we have to figure out how to solve that problem, right?
Yeah.
We've got to move forward. Now, as far as I just want to come back just a minute to the convention again, okay?
Yeah.
Because I was there, okay, and I was just enthralled with the whole process, and the idea that now the Republicans are the party of the working men and the people just got me excited.
Yeah. It should. That is the future for the Republican Party, because somebody's got to do it. And the Democrats, who through the 50s, 60s, 70s, you could probably argue that they, because of their union representation, that kind of thing. I was really talking about, and we're going over time, I'm sure, but
that's fine.
I was a little disappointed with the Teamsters president. And you know me, the writer, right? I wish I could have coached him. I wish I could have shaped his message.
Because
the first
he
15
had a
minutes,
message. I loved it.
He had a message that needed to be heard and that could have really been positive and really resonated with that. But then he went, you know, he just didn't get to the point. He couldn't help himself. He couldn't help himself, because that stuff runs deep and it's been there for years and years and years. But I do think that the Republican Party is becoming, and President Trump is absolutely the president of the working class. And it was evident during the time that he was in there until we got hit with the bioweapon. And then everything kind of, and I love the fact that the Democrats call us the cultist, when who are the people who got sick of masks first and stopped wearing them? It was all Trump people. It was all MAGA. Who was the lowest take rate on the jab? You know, it was Trump's people. But Trump was, you know, this is a flawed vessel. He is not perfect, but we still realize that he's the best thing we have going forward. And I'm excited that JD is his running mate. I think that's fantastic, because it brings a new generation that is not from the old generation and does not buy into their doctrines. You know, the world's police force and the unfettered free trade, and missing the point that free trade, and we both, you're the economist.
Right.
I just have a bachelor's in it, so I don't claim to be an economist. But it is the idea that, oh, dang it, I just got...
But, well, you think about it. It would work, but China's a currency manipulator, right?
So the
balance never happens.
I know what I was going to say is that free trade has to be the means to an end, not the end in and of itself. And so many of these conservative groups back in D.C., they believe free trade. The Americans for, I like it to call it Americans for Chinese prosperity, you know, these total free trade people, they believe it's the end in and of itself. We both know Adam Smith. We know that doctrine. We know that exists in the ivory tower. The problem is we don't live in an ivory tower. And so you have to look at it and the free trade, the end needs to be the well-being and prosperity of the American people. Free trade is a means to that, to the extent that it can be reciprocal and honest. And we ought to do that. I'm all for it. It is the most productive way to conduct the markets. But But the end is not free trade. The end is the well-being and prosperity of the American people.
And that's what MAGA really is.
And that's what MAGA really is, and it's what Donald Trump is trying to say. And, you know, again, sometimes imperfectly.
You know, I'll come back to your message from the first, and that is show me a single place where people are better off.
I mean, go through the list. Portland, Seattle. I mean, you can start on the West Coast. You can go to the middle of the country with Chicago and several others, St. Louis, all these other cities, and you can then go to the East Coast. And the answer is always the same. There is no place where life is better because Democrats are in charge. And of course, the punchline of the speech in the convention was then, why would we want to disagree better?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes
with those people.
What was the line? Sometimes we just have to disagree.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't. What did he say? Don't vote for me if you want to disagree better. Vote for me if you know we better disagree.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And I think that was a hashtag on Twitter for a while.
Oh,
I
yeah.
have no idea if it still is.
Very good.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, Dave Owen, and we'll have to continue this conversation.
I have no social media. There's no way you can find me anywhere.
Yeah, but we'll have to continue this conversation again because I think there's a lot of very neat things in it, and it's the very reason we need to get students to debate again and to read history and to understand what happened in the world and how it's repeating it.
Yeah, it is. It's just, you know, they buried history. Everything's gone into a memory hole.
Yeah.
And we could do a podcast on that.
Right.
Of just that. Anyway.
Well, I appreciate it. Dave Owen. We'll see you guys next week.
My pleasure.